let Ruth. Should I start now or wait for you to?
John's coming too. Give just a minute. I'll have John sit down. He's coming.
Evening. All right, we will call to order City of Philadelphia Planning Commission meeting. And start off with approval of minutes. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Please.
John Barlow.
Here.
Van Hunsaker.
Here.
Josiah Jessen.
Here.
Timothy Malott.
Here.
Darlene Rose.
Here.
Jerry Palmer.
Here.
Ruth Causey, Council Liaison.
Here.
All right, thank you. Approval of minutes. I do have one comment for the commissioners present. John, were you there all the way to the end of the meeting, or did you drop off at some point?
No, I was there. I did. I put this up for a while because it had to be on the charger.
Okay.
So my face wasn't there, but I was hearing you. So.
All right. Thank you.
That counts.
If you recall about the 3-hour mark, I complained about how long the meeting was going.
Yeah.
But that was the fever talk.
Yes. All right. No. I think that was a sane mind speaking up there. Does anybody else have any comments or questions about the minutes? Okay.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Josiah, did you vote or? Okay, unanimous. So our new business tonight will start with a public hearing. And that is regarding the property on North 12th Street, PC 23-02, regarding 511 North 12th Street. The applicant is appealing the decision of the planning official regarding a partition application. So CP 22-40. And the order of proceedings tonight will be start off with a staff report and then have the applicant's presentation, public testimony in favor, public testimony in opposition, and then neutral testimony, if any. And then the planning commissions can ask additional questions of staff. And then there can be a rebuttal by applicant, proponents, and opponents, followed by planning commission deliberations and a final decision. And at this point, we have one. Which one is this for? Yes, we have one person that would like to testify in favor.
In addition to the applicant.
In addition to the applicant, yes. No specific time limit shall apply to the testimony. However, please keep your comments brief and directed to the criteria upon which the decision is made. Persons testifying either orally or in writing may request a continuance to address additional comments or evidence submitted in favor of the application. If this request is made, please identify the new document or evidence during your testimony. And person testifying may also request that the record remain open 7 additional days to submit additional written evidence. Requests for allowing the record to remain open should be included in your testimony. The public hearing is now open. Does any planning commission member wish to declare any conflicts of interest?
I'll just say this, I'm The prior owner of the property, I was on the property on many occasions, so I'm very familiar with the property.
Okay, thank you.
Is that going to impact your ability to make a decision?
No.
Okay.
Does any planning member wish to declare any additional ex parte contacts or site visits
I did a site visit,
as a walk by or
drive by.
drive by?
I did as well, although not a planning commission.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone wish to rebut these disclosures of conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, or site visits? Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds, meaning the Planning Commission is not the appropriate body for this hearing? Okay. Land use decisions, such as this case under consideration this evening, are evaluated against applicable criteria from the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan as presented in the staff report. And we will now hear the staff report.
Good evening, everyone. So this application of procedures is a little bit different than we typically go through, where we have some specific criteria or specific case. In this, the reason why it's before you is because it's appeal of a type 2. So all type 2s are appealed to Planning Commission. Comes to type 3 and follow the type 3 procedures. The 3 items that the applicant needs to show as part of the application is, do they have standing? And the applicant does have standing because she was the one that applied for it. The second one is, did she meet the 14-day window? There's the appeal process that's on the decision letter, and she did that. The applicant did that. As well as appealing a specific limited scale of what she is, or what the applicant is appealing. So all 3 of those were met. And since this was a partition application, and we're going through, the applicant is appealing one part of that, and that is a specific issue to pave a portion of Lincoln Street that goes from 12th back to the new lot that they're creating. So what I did to kind of put this into place, because this is actually the first appeal of a type 2 that I've done. So I was looking at what was specifically appealed and took the criteria that I was following for the partition application and brought it into this. So I didn't go through all the other conditions. It's more specific to the actual paving or the requirements of the road, or the pavement. You want to get the distinction between a road and the pavement we're asking them to do, because the road, there's the right-of-way, 60-foot right-of-way there. We're not asking for the whole entire road to be built, but there are public works design standards that require that there is any pavement leading up to a parcel that's being developed to be paved. So as I kind of structured the staff report, was just to kind of focus on these types of requirements. So preliminary partition came with relating to development standards for filing the application, but part of that is that the public works design standards and other applicable ordinances and regulations apply to the resultant parcel. So the resultant parcel, they would only have to build the road if they were to build a house on it. The partition itself doesn't require them to build a road. It would be required upon a building permit being applied for and approved. So going through the other requirements, Access and circulation was part of the partition criteria. It was a new street access will be required for the partition parcel. The resulting parcel will still have access to North 12th Street. It meets that requirement. The public improvements part of this, I kind of separated it out as from the paved access to the road, from the other requirements of a street, which are infrastructure, curb and gutter, sidewalk. Those are items that can be exempt at this time if the applicant is willing to sign a non-remonstrance agreement for that portion of the road. And so that is available. It's not a requirement. It's something they would voluntarily enter into. If they decided not to sign the non-remonstrance agreement, then all of those portions of the road would have to be put into place. So that was really it. It was really just about following what the Public Works design standards were. Again, there was no specific criteria for this. The appeal is really did myself as the reviewer of the application, did I apply the criteria correctly? And so and the applicant disagrees and is appealing the process that I followed to come to the conclusion and the condition that this part of the road needs to be put in for a building permit to be issued. So.
Okay, are there any preliminary questions of staff at this time? And I'll say, as usual, preliminary questions, we can ask more detailed questions later after we've heard testimony. And I do have a few. Does anybody else want to jump in there first?
Van has his hand
up. Commissioner Hunsaker.
Yes, I guess just to clarify, Lincoln Street is a platted street, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So several things. Is there something that's already been produced that clearly spells out kind of the full design criteria regarding, asphalt thickness and those sorts of issues when it's, not the full roadway section? And is that 20-foot width something that kind of selected by somebody, or is that following a criteria? Or what can you tell us about how this conclusion was reached?
So the width of the road is a requirement of a private road or a city road that is not fully improved.
Right.
And as far as the thickness and all that, I can't speak to that, if that would, what that is and how that's followed, but I would believe that they have a thickness of, they have a requirement or for that, and that would have to be followed.
Yeah, that level of details in the design standards, the Public Works design standards, and so typically once an application is applied for, there's a pre-construction meeting with Public Works, and they're going to go through all that level of detail. But at the land use side, we don't get into that level of detail other than the width is specified.
Right. Okay. And if you could, I know there's been a lot of discussion about these issues in the past year or so, but can you give a very brief definition of a non-remonstrance agreement?
Basically saying that for this particular case, for what's typically required, but not at this time, that in any time in the future when the city does decide to implement the changes or the construction, that the person that signs the non-remonstrance will not object to the conditions that would, basically a special assessment on a road. So for instance, it would be a special assessment of properties that abut this road for purposes of construction. And however, I found out that there's 3 or 4 different ways that they can calculate an individual's contribution to it. But putting that aside, that they wouldn't object when that special assessment trigger is being pulled.
Okay.
Commissioner Jessup has a hand up.
Thanks. Commissioner Jessup.
So just to make sure that I understand you, Pat, that the requirements for the road will be resolved or dealt with when a building application comes in?
Correct, yes.
So maybe I'm not understanding what the commission is, what our role to play is in that. Then if there's no requirement for a road as part of the appeal, if that's going to be triggered as part of the building process.
Well, at this point, it's just a condition of approval of their partition. So their partition was reviewed, and there's some general standard conditions that come through it as far as recording and plat and how the plat or the partition is or survey is drawn up. And then based on what the resultant properties are, further conditions were put on it, such as access to it. So the condition is upon a building permit that a road is built, paved road, required paved road, it provides access to that resultant parcel. So if it's never built on, the condition doesn't have to be fulfilled. But the intent is for, and the applicant can probably speak to this, that they want to build a house back there on the resultant property. And so they're appealing that they have to install a road to access that property at this time.
Right, so the applicant is appealing the requirement of paving the access road, the access driveway as part of the petition, correct?
Correct, yeah.
But what I hear you saying is that you're going to require a road to be built when they apply to build a house back there anyways, correct?
Yes, they have to provide paved access to their.
No, I understand there is the requirement. I'm trying to determine if it needs to be a part of the application process, whether it's building or partitioning. Doesn't seem clear to me. Maybe you could explain a little more for us.
Well, it's in a residential, they're partitioning the parcel to be built upon. We know that because it's in a residential district. It was applied for to meet the setbacks, the lot size, and to gain access. So it was more of being, again, part of the criteria on the partition, as I went through some of them, is access and circulation, road, sidewalks, infrastructure. Is it all there available to have it to be able to approve a partition? So some of these conditions, although they are conditions of approval, they're more advisories as well. So I kind of get what you're saying is should it be part of this application or should it be part of a building permit application? And I think it could be part of both. And we do it, we put it, I include it as a condition, just to let them know that this is, they will have to do this, but in a sense, it's acting both as a condition of approval, but also advisory.
Okay, I understand. So then as a follow-up question, if the commission were to deny this request, would the city have any further requirements upon a building permit for approval or for improvements of the road beyond just the 20-foot asphalt paving?
I think in the building permit process, one of their requirements is to have paved access from the city right-of-way to the property. So their approach would have to be paved. And then there's also the requirement of the building permit that all parking surfaces have to be paved. So their driveway would have to be paved. So.
Maybe this is, maybe a little too much, but since all that really comes and building this approach roadway comes with the building permit, does this condition of approval really accomplish anything? Since if that lot already existed somehow previously in the past, we wouldn't be here today, but yet they'd still have to build that approach roadway. To build a house, to get a building permit to build a house. So procedurally, are we completely clean within the city regarding, not having to sit through another appeal later?
Yeah, so I think in the staff report, Pat kind of captured the conundrum that we found ourselves in from a staff standpoint, that last paragraph on page 6. I'll read it rather than try to explain it not necessarily liking to read things, but he says, in summary, the planning commission cannot simply waive this requirement or grant a variance to it through the appeal to the land use decision. The planning commission's role is to determine if the approval criteria was applied properly in this land use decision. If the condition to pave the portion of Lincoln Street that leads to the new driveway is appropriate. If the commission believes the criteria was applied properly, it should consider denying the applicant's appeal. There is a process, you could go through a variance process at the time the building permit was pulled. If they wanted to vary from the design standards, right, the applicant could apply for it like a type C, a class C variance. We were a little reluctant to put that in there just because we're looking at the class C variance and that criteria is fairly high as well. And so I just encourage the applicant, regardless of what happens tonight, to talk to Pat about that variance process and see if it would be a good candidate for a type C variance or not. So we didn't want to lead the applicant down a road that didn't look very promising, but there is still an option there. It's probably more appropriate when you're looking at a design standard that you don't agree with. This appeal tonight really is just focused on, did the planning staff follow the correct procedure? And the recommendation of the staff report is that we did, and I concur with that. So
okay,
kind of where we're at for tonight's meeting.
So it's almost, so I guess it's fair to say then that what's before the planning commission is to verify that the planning department provided the appropriate information to the applicant regarding the future building permit process.
Right, and that the condition of approval was appropriately applied.
Okay,
in this case.
I think I'm clear. Rest of the planning commission, do you feel like that's clear enough to proceed? Okay, thank you.
So no more questions, then I guess. Is what you're saying.
I
no more.
actually do have a question.
Okay, well then, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it may be that I'm just not familiar with the vocabulary, but on page 4, where in bold under part B it states new street access will be required for the partitioned parcel. The resultant parcel will still have access from North 9th Street. Resultant parcel, is the resultant parcel the parcel that's created by the partition, or is it what's left? Because on the map, from the map, it appears that it's the latter, and maybe it doesn't make a difference.
The resultant, parcel is the parcel left over, so it would be the existing.
The existing home.
Yeah.
And so it clearly has access from 12th Street.
Correct.
Whereas the only possible street access to the new parcel is on Lincoln. Thank you.
Any more questions? Councilor Collins?
Does the condition of the connecting roadways have any bearing on this decision?
Connecting to the,
For example, the condition of 12th Street, the condition of other streets that connect to 12th Street.
not really. I just looked at it from the requirement of having to be paid from the Public Works design standards. I know, and I think the reason we went with kind of a partial private road, but also the non-remonstrance is because 12th Street's not improved. So I felt like we were kind of in, I was kind of left a little bit in the middle there, because being aware of what happened on 11th Street, where we had some non-remonstrance agreements signed and they were waived. And so I didn't, and I had to go to Chris and kind of learn the background that the city council had a directive not to take non-remonstrance agreements. But in this case, it seemed, this is more of a proportional approach to get them access so that they can build a house rather than have them build the entire road. So kind of still left that non-remonstrance agreement option out there. Just seemed more appropriate just to go here instead of making the whole road, even though I know there was some specific kind of pullback on allowing for these non-remonstrances in the future. Have the issues that came up before. So, but again, we're looking at more proportionality on this.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else regarding the process or? All right, thank you. City Attorney.
Thank you. At this time, this is a reminder to those of you testifying that you should direct your testimony towards the applicable criteria of the case or other criteria in the municipal code, comprehensive plan, or land development code, which you believe to apply to this decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the city or other parties the opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. The failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court.
Okay, we'll now hear the applicant's presentation. Could you join us at the table and
But I would love to
state
have
your
way
name?
too much paper.
All right.
I'm not sure how I was going to do that. All right. Please let me know if anything. I'm not sure the process here, so
Yeah.
stop making me step.
Start with your name.
I'm Alexandria Baldwin. I am the owner of 511 North 12th Street. I applied for this partition recently. My goal, as Pat kind of stated, is to live on the property and have my mother live on the back half. I'd like to, be able to do a multi-generational kind of living thing. I have 3 boys, so that's kind of my dream here. So my initial ask was just to partition the property. We cut it pretty much down the middle. So it looks like a lot of you are familiar with the property where the front half is 12th Street and then the side is Lincoln. Prior to purchasing the property, we checked with the city to see if there would be any requirement to pave that road down 12th Street. We had looked into purchasing other properties that had that requirement attached. Those properties had a private road. So the road was owned by that property owner. So we checked to make sure that there wouldn't be a similar issue here. They said, and I was reassured that because this is an existing road and we're just separating the property in half, that wouldn't be a requirement. I was reassured of the same thing at the point in which I submitted this application to partition the property. And it wasn't until I got that application back, I got my response, that I found out that paving the road is now a requirement. I was always aware of the non-remonstrance agreement, and I have absolutely no problem with that. I agree that, adding sidewalks, adding infrastructure, adding paved roads, all in the benefit of the city, all in the benefit of the homeowners. I have no quarrel with that. So I have printed off and gone through a good amount of paperwork at this point. I don't know how far into this I need to go, though. I'm really confused by the statement that this is the wrong court for this is the wrong place. I have my way too much paperwork. All right. I have my official decision letter here that I received from the planning on the decision. So there are the two requirements. Number 5 on here is a non-remonstrance agreement covering future street installation and sidewalk along Lincoln Street will be required. Number 7 is the applicant will have to pave all portions of Lincoln Street that lead to their driveway. I've heard 20 foot was said in this meeting, but prior to that, I haven't known what this meant. I pulled some, what is this? The transportation system plan has local street typical cross-section standards, which shows 10 feet for driving each direction and 8 foot for parking each direction. So that would be 36, if I'm doing my math here correct. I don't understand why this ask was put on here, and there isn't a clear understanding from anything I've read, which includes the comprehensive city plan, the public works design standards, the city codes, and the Philomath transportation system plan. I don't see any explanation of this specific ask. It doesn't seem standard. I have some concerns pulled from each of these places. In the public works design standards, there's a requirement that use and design and materials for any streets that are built, practical design life of not less than 30 years. I have the assumption, based on the fact that I'm being asked to do a non-remonstrance agreement and pave the street, that sometime in less than 30 years, we're going to come through, we're going to pave it properly, we're going to put in the water, which there's no water lines under the street. We're going to put in proper drainage. We're going to put in sidewalks. We're going to put in curbs. All of those are going to come. So this initial work that I'm doing I'm assuming, be ripped out, at least need to be substantially redone. There's also in the city code, let me find my section. It looks like 18.80.20. It kind of references this. The city may accept, this is point 4 on this section here. The city may accept future improvement guarantee, which I understand to be the non-remonstrance agreement. Example, owner agrees not to object against the formation of a local improvement district in the future. In lieu of street improvements, if one or more of the following conditions exist. There are 4 conditions here. A partial improvement may create a potential safety hazards to motorists or pedestrians. I think putting in pavement without creating appropriate drainage, especially at this site, would be a hazard. I went by earlier today and took some photos. I don't know if I can pass these.
Probably not.
Okay, well, the current dirt road, which is there, which is similar to all of the other, well, I guess gravel road is a more appropriate term. The current gravel road that is there, which is similar to all of the other gravel roads coming off of 12th Street, is flooded. My property is flooded. It's a wet area. Drainage is already an issue, and that amount of pavement without addressing the drainage first seems to me to be a hazard. So the second requirement here, B, Due to a development condition of adjacent properties, it's likely that street improvements would be extended in the foreseeable future, and the improvement associated with the project under review does not, by itself, provide increased street safety or capacity or improved pedestrian circulation. I think that's applicable as well. As I said, it seems like this will be continued to, the city is going to make these improvements soon enough. And that would only be paving the portion that leads to my driveway, which is half of the street. This C here doesn't seem to apply in this case, but D is the improvement is associated with an approved land partition on property zoned residential, and the proposed land partition does not create any new streets, which I think is exactly the circumstance that I'm in right now. I think, at least to me, it feels reasonable to make this request to not pave the road. And with the strict understanding on my part that when the time comes, we will do our part to make sure that the road is paved properly and that all of the city services are available to the residents.
Can you restate the section of code that you were reading from there?
Restate what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, City Code 18.80.020, transportation improvements. And this was number 4, the bullet points below that.
Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we potentially have some questions for you?
I think that covers the majority of what I was looking to say.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the commissioners regarding the applicant's presentation?
I guess I have a question. How much use, this is not a through street at this time, right? It doesn't go all the way through.
No, it goes halfway to the next block. And there are 2 houses that are currently using it to access their residence, so we would be the 3rd.
Okay. And you wouldn't be operating a business out of there? It's just your mom?
Just my mom.
Going?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Jessen, do you have your hand up? You do have your hand up. Is it current?
Sorry, I was still muted. I was just curious if the applicant has pursued any alternative methods to build your mother a home on your property. Was the partition necessary to build that other house?
I spoke to the planning department and was told that partitioning would be necessary, that I couldn't put 2 dwellings on the same property. I have not looked through the code to see if there is an additional option there. I've taken their word on that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. We will now move to public testimony, beginning with testimony in favor. Before you make your comments, please sign in with your name and what is it we're saying now? This says address, but we pulled back from full address, didn't we?
Just the city addresses.
Yeah, your name and city of residence. And our first public testimony is Ramona Angel. In favor? Yeah, please come up to the table so we can catch you on the microphone there.
I'm Ramona Angel. I'm the mom in question.
Okay. In your city of residence?
I currently live in Albany, although
Okay.
I split a lot of time between Columbus to visit and help with the grandkids.
Okay.
So what I'm hoping to do is actually move an existing mobile home that I live in now. I live in a manufactured home on a hardship permit in Albany. We were taking care of aging parents who've gone into assisted living. So I need to skedaddle, and I'm really hoping to be able to just move to be closer to Al, because it is nice that we're this close, but it would be really nice to be in the district. I did want to say that dealing with the city of Paloma so far has been actually wonderful, very kind, and I appreciate. I certainly don't have any acrimony about this, other than I just don't want to bear the expense of doing it twice. You have been wonderful to work with. I was actually kind of happy about coming to the town because that's the first impression, really, and it was a nice impression. We were not developing the lot, obviously, for anything other than just our own personal use. As far as, I'm a little bit flustered because I did not know that this was the wrong venue to approach, as far as that it would actually be at the building permit point that we probably should be looking at addressing this, sounds like. We did ask once the decision came back, Alex actually contacted, and they said that this was the venue to take to address it. Not, we just asked, can we come and talk about it? And they said this is the way to do it. So this is how we ended up here. That being said, one of the things I was told initially, well, and I understand that this was kind of confusing when they were developing it. I know that maybe they weren't exactly sure how to proceed with the specific request, but at the point where they said that we would need to put in the strip between 12th Street and the driveway, they also said that along with that would come the agreement to cooperate later to pay the portion when the sidewalks and the further improvements came through, and that strip would actually most likely have to be torn up. I understand one or the other has to happen, but doing it twice hurts. Financially, emotionally, all that. It was mentioned that perhaps we could ask the other folks on the street to chip in and kind of pave at the same time, but then that would just put those folks in the same position that we're in, where they're having to pay for it twice, because then they, of course, have to go through. So that's not something that we wanted to do. They actually seem very kind. The neighbors have been really nice. That's it. I guess it's just an appeal. We're not trying to develop it for funding. I work with Community Services Consortium. Trust me, I cannot afford to live in Paloma under normal circumstances. This is just like a gift of an opportunity, and I'm hoping that we can do it for our family. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess I should have asked if there's any questions for the speaker. Okay, thank you. And this is for the other public hearing?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We have no one that would like to speak in opposition, but we do have a neutral speaker, Mr. Lesko. And you're here to speak about the other.
Well, I'm here to speak about the current.
About this one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well then.
Neutral, please.
Okay, thank you.
Robert Hisco, Paloma. I'm concerned or because of the amount of moisture that is in that on that section of the road, that it would be at the time that it would be paved or developed, that it would be done to the full city standards, so that you're going to mitigate the moisture issue going on, and that it just seems, it makes sense to me that you would, at the time that it would be done, you'd put the proper road base in, whatever width that is to meet the city standards. And that's probably my biggest concern, is that at whatever is being required, that it would. Pat, you mentioned about 20 foot. That, I'm trying to think what the easement is. Is that 60 foot, Chris, on Lincoln?
The right of way is 60 feet wide.
Right. Okay, so that would include for sidewalks. Okay, so, all right, so then what is the required width of a road for a 60-foot right-of-way? Is that 20, or that's gotta be wider than that? Like she was saying, about 37, 38?
Just required 10 feet each way. That's standard. There's half a dozen examples around the city that we've used with 10 foot going in each direction.
And that would meet city standards?
We need to have parking, but we shouldn't get too deep into this.
Okay.
No need for a bike lane on a dead end.
Right,
road.
exactly, yeah. Okay, gotcha. All right. Yeah, that was my concern, proper drainage. So, and that's not being done, you know, the road base and all that structure for that road is being done only once, not twice. Thank you.
And we forgot to ask you if you lived in Florence, which.
I did say I lived in Florence.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep, yep, yep.
Sorry, I missed it. I wasn't paying attention.
Exactly.
Are there any questions for Mr. Pisco? Thank you. And another bit of testimony, neutral testimony. Steve?
From Steve. My name is Steve Sear. I'm a Philomath resident. And a neutral thought in listening to testimony, my curiosity is, I'm assuming we're an R1 zone. And does that allow a companion unit by right these days? It's
R3.
It's R3, okay, didn't know.
But all three zones would allow it for an ADU.
That's what I'm just curious if that's a potential solution for somebody.
I thought about that too, but I do remember them saying that they were going to move.
They have other, yeah.
But it is an option.
Just it's out there. Thank you.
And any questions for him? I think we can discuss this later. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do planning commission members have any further questions of staff?
When listening to the testimony and a little bit of knowledge that I have of that lot, it seems like water and drainage seems to be a major issue. And with my own professional background in dealing with roadways, among other things, I am just questioning why we could not just use the non-remonstrative agreement to get the road eventually improved, which appears to be part of the agreement that the owners are willing to take in, and not go in and do anything substantial with the roadway today. If we're talking about using the city roadway standards, we're talking about a non-porous surface, which is only going to exasperate any of the surface drainage issues, rather than, I gather today, that it's a porous surface. So I'm just that's a level of concern, because I believe that if you start looking at dealing with a non-porous surface, it's going to snowball into something far more than 20 feet of roadway. And we're going to be moving water from one location into another location, which may in fact impact adjacent properties. We may be creating more than what we're looking for, where in the long term, it appears we do have a solution. I'm not sure if that was a question, more of a statement.
And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a couple of other things that I wanted to kind of let the commission know. I mean, one of the reasons too, when you have a dirt road or a gravel road up against a paved road, and even though this is only going to be one additional household accessing that road, bringing out that gravel onto an improved road, you're going to degrade the improved road a lot quicker than you would if it was paved. I'm not sure. I think with the 25 foot or with a 50, 60 foot right away, you're only paving 20 of it, you got plenty of area for the water to go. I don't know if it's gonna, I mean, I don't know if it's, I can't 100% say that it's not gonna affect the adjacent properties, but I highly doubt it with still an additional 40 feet of right of way to gather the water, probably flood no more than it is now or no less. And then just to say the other thing, and maybe this is something we can revisit, is we had more flexibility last year before the local improvement district on 11th Street kind of came into a lot of hearings and discussion, because we had non-remonstrance agreements for a lot of those properties down 11th Street when they were forming the local improvement district. And they were kind of held as, well, there's a lot, it's very complicated. I won't get into all the complications. I don't even really know it myself. But before that incident, we had a little bit more flexibility. We could look at these individual things. Well, from that, the policy that was taken from that was no more remonstrance agreements. I mean, we have a remonstrance agreement, non-remonstrance agreement in place here because it's more proportional to this. But I was told that we're not to apply those. Whereas prior to that, the policy was a little bit more it was more of an individual call. That was last council. Councils changed in January. Maybe they revisit that and give us some more direction on flexibility. I mean, because we can't be here. You guys don't, as Chris read the last paragraph, we don't have the authority to grant a variance to this. You can't wipe out regulations, code and regulations. You're here to say, did I apply the criteria correctly? But we would like to have a little bit of flexibility in certain cases. It's just, I'm following what the policy that was set from last year's discussion on the local improvement district that was going forward. But not to say that would have changed the decision, but it may have given us a little bit of flexibility to look, again, maybe more proportionality wise. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but I kind of wanted to say a little bit of that because, you know, yeah, do I feel like some of this is, you know, the cost on one homeowner is adequate? Probably not, but I can't choose which code I can apply when I can't. So I'm kind of in that middle. I'd like to have some policy set to give me, you know, or give the planning official a little bit of direction on flexibility.
Well, I think maybe my question is probably to you. And the question is going to be, is it appropriate to ask you at this point in time in the process, Gary?
Yeah, go ahead. She'll say it's not appropriate.
Okay, she'll tell me it's not appropriate. Since what I'm hearing from you, Pat, is that the city council does not want to use the non-remonstrative agreement process, the tool, but in reality, we are here. And so since using that tool, by using that tool and approving this application, we are thereby meeting the portion of the city code that we're supposed to meet, meaning that at some point in time, there's a roadway that's going to be able to put in there. Now, from the guidance from the city council, are we not to use that tool at all? Or are we allowed to use it partially? Or do we use it all the way? Because right now what I'm hearing is shades of gray. I'm hearing that we have a non-remonstrative agreement that's kind of saying, well, you don't have to do the curbs and gutters now, but you got to do the traffic surface. Where what you're saying is the city council has said, we don't want to use that agreement. So I guess, and I may be creating a mountain for the homeowner, because one way this can go is say you can't use that agreement at all, you can't move forward on this property unless you do all that right now. And that's not where I'm interested in going, and I want to be careful with that. But that's you kind of get where my question is.
So I think, Chris, did you want to chime in really quickly?
Yeah, again, there's a little distinction here I think that'll help is even in the past when we were using non-remonstrance agreements, we still required that the property owner have paved access from their home to the street. So that's a requirement outside of the non-remonstrance. The non-remonstrance agreement is specific to public infrastructure that's going to be owned and operated by the city, so the street itself. But having a non-remonstrance agreement or not having a non-remonstrance agreement does not change the requirement to have paved access to your property at the time that you develop it.
And that's the section that you referred to earlier. Somebody referred to a section of it.
Right, so if you look
Okay,
at,
all right.
yeah, if you look at page
Answer that
3
question.
under A1, where it says the proposed preliminary plat complies with all the applicable development code sections and other applicable ordinance and regulations. That's where those section, PMC section, or chapter 18.3 and then 18.60 kind of come into effect, because 18.60 has subsumed in it, what is this, access and circulation. So that's where the condition of approval was brought in, because in order to comply with that criteria standard that it complies with access and circulation, the condition of approval would be that you then pave that portion so that you have a paved lane up to your to the property. So the so gutters and other public improvements is separate, it can be separated in a way than the paved surface. And so what your decision is tonight is, do these conditions of approval, all of them, not necessarily just that paving one, are they required to meet, or were they required to properly apply this, the criteria for a plat? And to do that, that means they had to meet all of the right criteria under 18.30 and under 18.60. And so that's kind of why, with the staff report laid out the way it is, they try to go in and say which ones are met and what additional conditions need to be applied in order to meet it. And so then it's your job to come in and say, were those properly applied?
Understood.
But if that's the limit of our assignment tonight, I don't see how this hearing is effective at all for the applicant. What could she possibly accomplish? If we're just looking at the written criteria and saying, did you apply that properly? If that's the limit of our remit, I don't see how this is effective at all for the applicant.
Because if the planning official didn't apply it properly, then this is what the appeal is, so that you can say, planning official, you did not apply this properly, we're going to grant this appeal. But if you find that he did apply this properly, then that's the scope of your review under the municipal code. And because the municipal code is the is basically the end all be all for your jurisdiction over what you can do, what your powers are that council has delegated to you, that's why we're in this situation as we are here.
And I'll just interject that I look forward to discussing that a little bit later when we get to deliberations.
Okay, I'll wait. I'll pull my ignorance in advance.
Yeah.
I'm as guilty as well, John.
Commissioner Jessen, I believe you were first.
I'll hold my comments for deliberation as well.
All right. Commissioner Hunsicker.
Yeah, just based on what you said, Chair, I have an answer for all these questions.
Awesome.
And I'll save that for deliberations, because that, I think, is where it's appropriate.
I agree. Are there other questions for staff regarding the information presented or the process or anything like that? And we can ask more questions once we get to deliberation as well. So I'll retract that question about process. Let's save that for deliberations. Maybe anything more specific about the property or the review. Okay, thank you. So now rebuttals, beginning with the applicant. And I'll remind you that new information in support of the application may not be introduced during a rebuttal. Do you wish to rebut any of the testimony that you've heard? Disagree with anything that anybody said?
Questions, but I'm not.
Can you join the table so you can be heard online?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I have questions. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time.
And I do apologize. I will jump in. Technically, because it's testimony, it's not really a back and forth conversation. It's more your testimony towards staff or towards the commission, and the commission will ask you clarifying questions if they have any, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'll give you a clue that it can be a rebuttal if you say yes, but they didn't talk about this, this, and this, and I still don't understand. That's still a rebuttal, as long as you don't expect us to answer and it to be a back and forth conversation.
Okay. All right. So I guess my not a question is I don't understand why I'm here. When I got this response for my petition, I reached out to Chris and said, like, hey, is there something we can do about this? And I was told that this was the appropriate avenue. So that's why I'm here. But it doesn't seem to make sense after hearing everything that you guys have to say about what you can and cannot determine on, I guess. It also seems as if we might be looking at Lincoln Street as if it is my driveway, only having to pave 20 feet, only having to have that paved approach. In all of the codes, that really, at least from my interpretation, seems to be a driveway, has to be my paved approach to a road. I've always looked at Lincoln and thought it was a road. It's a road on the maps. I'm confused. Yeah, I guess those are my not questions.
Thank you very much. No, that was actually good. Thank you. And rebuttals are open to proponents and opponents. So
My rebuttal would simply be that if it is now in fact an ordinance or an official rule that you cannot ask for a
non-remonstrance.
Yes. There you go then. That's a problem.
good. Thank you. Okay. There has not been a request for continuance or to hold the record open. Does the applicant waive a 7-day period to submit a final written argument?
Yes.
Am I good to close the public hearing now? Because I always mess this part up. Is there anything else? All right. Public hearing is now closed. And we can move on to deliberations. And I think Commissioner Jessen was first in line for deliberation discussion.
Thank you. I do think it is an interesting situation that the commission finds itself in regarding these requirements and our direction from last year's city council to avoid using a non-remonstrance agreement due to past situations that the city's found itself in or relying on that tool. To reply to the most recent rebuttal, I would agree that if we cannot apply a non-remonstrance tool in this case, then we should be applying the appropriate public works standard. And if we look at that standard, I'm not sure we've really covered that closely. I believe the standard is the full 3/4 road be built to a new building or improvements. And I see, Pat, where you're trying to find a happy medium for the applicant, that they don't have to do a full 3/4 improvement and in non-remonstrance seeing that this is a gravel road, it's been a gravel road for a number of years. There's a number of residences already using it as a gravel road. And it can be tricky for us to try and find that happy medium. I do think that there could be more conversation between city staff and the applicant to help inform them of what the full requirements are of this partition application. Perhaps that was misunderstood. Perhaps there's some misunderstandings in the applicant's reading of the Public Works standard. I myself have some questions around that. I would have one suggestion that staff look at putting in a definition for driveway in the standard. There's plenty of terms in there that are well defined, but it seems like a lot of the verbiage that the city is hanging their position on is determined by what does that mean in the standard? What is a driveway? What's the definition of it? And I could not find that in Public Works standard. So I would suggest that the staff take a look at that and perhaps look at revising the standard to add that in the future. But I do agree that it is the city standard to require a paved road to any new building or improvement on property. So that's my take on it, is that I can definitely see the city's requirement being applied properly here, even though it's not strictly to the standard. I see that staff is trying to work with the applicant to find a happy medium. So I'd like for the commission, hopefully we can come together and maybe find a happy medium for the applicant here.
Commissioner Hunsaker.
Yes, thank you. I do believe that the staff has misapplied some of the information they used in order to come to the conclusions that they did. I think we need to start at the beginning, in that in order to petition this piece of property, that new piece of property has to be on a street. Lincoln Street is a platted street. That's the only reason they can even be allowed to petition it. So Lincoln Street is their access to their property. It's not 12th Street. 12th Street, staff has somehow decided that 12th Street is the access. That's just not accurate. And therefore, then requiring a paved section from 12th to their property is inappropriate to even request. We have it on the books, and then in addition to that, we do have on the books, as the applicant had stated in under 18.80.020, we do allow non-remonstrance agreements. It doesn't matter what the city council said. They can't have a law and then say, well, don't apply it. Or maybe the lawyer could correct me if I'm wrong about that, but it doesn't seem like, unless you change the law, you can't not do it. So having that, and that even staff had that on there as well, to be able to do that, for having a non-remonstrance agreement. The reasoning Ms. Baldwin had for having to repave the road twice, agreeing to do it once and then having to do it twice, if that makes no sense. The issues now that was brought up about the drainage, that makes total sense. You don't want to do it until you do it correctly and put storm drains and gutters in. Otherwise, you would or may well create a problem for other people. As noted, on Lincoln Street. It's already being accessed by two property owners for their use as their street. To somehow tell another person, no, you can't do that. You have to do something different. In my mind is, I can't even figure how they came up with that. So I am definitely willing to approve the applicant's position and I have a thing, but I'll wait till other people talk. So, yeah, the staff just did this part wrong. Thank you.
At some point, I'd like to hear from Counselor Causey. I'll leave it up to you whether she goes first or you go first.
I'm going down a little different path. So let me go first, then we can come back to the non-remonstrative. I'm looking at section 1865-020F as in Frank 3. Access, this talks about access to properties. Option 3, access is from a public street adjacent to the development parcel. If practical, the owner developer may be required to close a consolidated existing access points as a condition of approval. If practical, it's saying. Street accesses shall comply with access spacing requirements with subsections such and such. It's talking about subdivisions. And I haven't gone all the way up to the definitions portion of the standards, but I'm in concurrence with counselor there in that, what's the definition of a public street? It's already illegally a public street the way it exists today. And so if we're taking and we're applying that she needs to provide a paved access to the public street, then turning Lincoln as a public street means she provides that access to Lincoln, because that is the public street. Yes, 12th is a public street, but Lincoln is the access that she has off of. So based on that interpretation of the standards, I would argue that that's what she has to provide at this point in the process. And then going on to the council, how you deal with the future improvements of Lincoln's a whole nother animal.
So should we just point out again, and it may have got lost in the conversation, that under Public Works Design Standards, Division 2 and 2.3.J, alleys or unimproved street right-of-way used as driveways. That's the title of it. Existing alleys or unimproved street right-of-ways used as driveways for new structures, whether or not the land use approval is required, shall be paved to city standards and approved public street, which vehicle access is taken. So it's a code. It's not an interpretation.
But doesn't that go back to Commissioner Jessup's point that driveway isn't defined? And then Commissioner Hunsaker's point is we're dealing with a street. Lincoln is a street. Lincoln is not the driveway to be paved. It's the driveway that accesses the property to Lincoln. I think we're handicapped by a lack of definition of the driveway.
Can you say which page you were on when you read that?
Top of page 5.
Also, driveway is defined. And it's defined in 18.15010. And a driveway means an area that provides vehicular access to a site except for public and private streets. A driveway begins at the property line and extends into the site. Driveways do not include parking, maneuvering, or circulation areas in parking space areas.
And is Lincoln a public street?
I believe so, yes.
Then Lincoln's not a driveway.
Right, but that goes back to what he was saying about unimproved streets.
But I mean, It says existing alleys or unimproved street right-of-ways used as driveways. I argue Lincoln's a street because there's multiple driveways coming off of that street currently. It's not like I'm going out and I am taking for a single parcel of land over that to get out. No, that currently existing. Now, if that's considered non-conforming, and we can talk about that whole issue, but currently that's not a driveway, that's a street. It's unimproved, but it's a street.
Because it's used by multiple.
Because it's used by multiple people, I would argue. I mean, what defines a street? I need to go back and look at what the definition of a street is.
Can I ask the question, what is the
I'm
definition?
sorry, we're getting into the
No,
nuts and bolts.
It's okay, the street is also defined.
Yeah,
But I think the pertinent question is, what does improved mean?
yeah.
If
What
it's
is improved?
if it's
Because
gravel, is that improved?
Yeah, I don't know what, I don't, that,
No, an improved street is improved to city standard, so.
I have another question. Can we get some direction from either the chairman or council if this commission, if the public works design standards is part of our purview, do we need to be upholding those, the design standards as well as the PMC? Because we're talking about both right here, right? Like one is a design standard that is what the staff references in a lot of their suggestions, but also we're referencing the actual city standard that we're requiring the applicant to uphold.
Right, so to answer that question, design standards is that 18.60, where it lays out the design standards that apply are 18.65 access and circulation, 18.70 landscaping, on and on and on. The one at issue in this case being the 18.65 access and circulation. So yes, it is what you need to apply, and that's what the condition, it's what the criteria are that you're going to be applying pursuant to approval of a preliminary plat. It's that 18.13 land use district administration and 18.60 design standards administration.
Okay, understood. Thank you. So if I could ask a question to Chris or Pat, I suppose, if we could take a separate example of any other different partition in the last 5 years where the city has required the applicant to upgrade unimproved city streets back to an improved street, which I think is in the public design standard, is that not the driveway, I believe, is being interpreted as the whole path that your car would drive from an improved street to your garage. Correct? Is there any example that the city can draw on that we could use as a standard or example to go by? Because I understand that the city has these standards for entire subdivisions where a whole new street is being created and everything needs to be improved up to city standards back to a city street that's already improved. It seems like trying to find what is the applicable standard. Did the city apply it?
And it's not in the last 5 years, but if you go further back, there's a lot of situations where there were partitions and building permits issued where the driveway was paved as required, but they didn't do any paving on the streets. There's a number of streets in town that were gravel until chip seals that are on there now that have to get a lot of maintenance, and that's not quite to city standards still. So it feels a lack, and I don't know when all these specific code language came into play, but I know there's been inconsistency on how it's been dealt with. If you put the code aside, this could have been put in last year. I don't know.
Yeah, I think at least the last 7+ years, we very consistently have required all surfaces that are being driven on, parked on, maneuvered on, be paved, hard surface. Or the honeycomb with the gravel on top, like at Soft Stars parking lot. There's alternatives that are allowed within the code, but in short, we say hard surface, and that has been the requirement. That's been very consistent for many, many years now. We've gone to the code and we've gone to the design standards. We have implemented those and required those. So that has been very consistent. Specific example to Commissioner Jessen, North 11th Street comes to mind. That's an unimproved street. And you'll see in almost every instance, the property owners had to extend the hard surface beyond their property line out to meet the existing paved road portion of 11th Street. So it was improvements off of their property outside of the scope of their property line, but it was required in order to have hard surface from the existing pavement to, from the end of the existing pavement to as far hard they had to go to get to their property line and provide hard surface continuous to the property. That was done on half a dozen plus properties up on North 11th Street, and we can point to other properties on 12th Street where we've been consistent with that.
And I guess I know it's a different thing, but have there been cases where somebody's had to pave something that other people are already driving on? I understand from the property out to where they get to that adjacent pavement, but it seems to me to be a different thing where, if the gravel road, if we just applied this blindly, if the gravel road was, 10 blocks long and this new development was 5 blocks out and there was a couple of neighbors down that road, would that be the case where one person would have to pave 20 feet wide for 5 blocks to get to their house when there's a lot of other traffic on that road? It makes it a gray zone that there's existing properties that are using that road and they're not part of this process. And I don't have it clear in my, two things I'm thinking about the justice of it.
To answer your question, no, there's not any of, at least in my 4 years, that's all I can say.
Yeah, right.
My 4 years here,
Yeah.
I've never had to apply into one property like this. We've done a lot of other partitions where there's the partition into 4 or 5 parcels, and they've created either, again, private roads, but the private roads serving multiple lots.
Right.
Being taken out.
They're new.
No,
Yeah, that's very different.
this is the first scenario. Yeah.
Commissioner Malott,
No, I'm good. I'm gonna.
Okay. Councilor Causey, do you have anything to add based on other conversations that would be relevant to this case in hand without getting too deep into other issues?
I do, and first I want to recognize all the thoughtful comments that have been made and the consideration that's been taken here. I think that's noteworthy. It's a great planning commission. With respect to non-remonstrance agreements, I don't believe the council is, and I'm speculating here because I can't speak for the full council, but I don't believe the council is opposed to them. I believe the council wants to ensure that all parties have a clear understanding of exactly what they mean and what the repercussions are of using a non-remonstrance agreement. And I think the council wants to ensure that they are not abused. After going through 18 months, I'm sorry, of very challenging discussions and considerations, with an outcome that was not in the best interest of the city. We want to figure out how to make this work and how to ensure that developers who do develop property with the intention of renting it or selling it for personal gain, that they pay their fair share in developing infrastructure. In this particular case, and in general, I don't believe that any code language changes have been made with respect to non-remonstrance agreements. Do you agree with that?
I do not personally work on that ordinance, and that would have gone through council anyway. So I don't believe so, but.
Yeah. So I think there are two fundamental points in this case that stick out in my mind. One is the issue of drainage. And I agree with the applicant that this is a low-lying street that is unimproved, that is susceptible to flooding. And I don't think that putting 20 feet of pavement on it is going to help that. Now, I'm not an engineer and I'm not a paver. I'd like to get a professional opinion on that. But if I think of North 11th Street, which has ditches on both sides of the road, if I think of soft star shoes, maybe they use the honeycomb surface so that water could drain through it. But I'm just not sure that partially paving this makes a whole lot of sense, even if it has been required and has been done in other cases. The other concern I have is that if you issue a building permit and at that time you require a non-remonstrance agreement, which the applicant has indicated they're amenable to, I don't see, if there's a drainage problem, I don't see why you can't include the paving in that non-remonstrance agreement, the full 3/4 street improvement, even though under other conditions you might require paving. So I think those are the 2 points that really stick out in my mind.
Can I ask a couple of questions? Could the non-remonstrance agreement specifically exclude them from having to participate in future paving of the road so that that property's not paying for paving it twice? Is it possible, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
With the caveat that they build, so we're getting into the weeds a little bit on the design standards, but there's a whole nother paragraph of the design standards that says when a property owner is required to make improvements to the public right of way, it needs to be done to a standard where it doesn't have to get ripped off and redone when the street gets improved. So they'll be held to the standard to make the 20-foot section such that it's not going to need to be replaced when the full street is improved. So that means more engineering, more design, more work that goes into it so that it's not just a waste
asphalt, much deeper
so it's not just
gravel below the asphalt.
Which again, you know, when these applications come in, like for a partition, which was this application, you only dig down so deep into all of these design standards, right? At this point, it's a land use decision for partition. And the instruction is we need to have paved access. We want to make sure we capture that early in the process, because if you don't say it now and we don't apply the code to access and we don't speak to it, then we get all the way down to an approval for a partition and before they find out that they also have to have this access issue that didn't get resolved. So it is appropriate that it's brought up now. So staff is exactly on the mark at approving it when they did with the condition that got placed there. But you're not going to get into the level of design standards to how thick the pavement needs to be and what the floodplain issue is up there, where the wetlands are, where the drainage is going to be. That level of detail just doesn't come until much later into the game, which is very frustrating for a property owner. I totally get it. It's frustrated on the staff side as well, but it's just not a level of detail that you go into when you're looking to partition a plat, right? Or partition a piece of property. So there's always going to be more details. I think to pull things back to tonight, again, is access and circulation part of the criteria that we're looking at in this review? The staff report indicates it is, and we've heard from the attorney that's part of the process. Was it applied appropriately? You know, I believe it was. I could just one more issue with the non-remonstrance agreements. I do have direction from the city council to avoid using these non-remonstrance agreements. It's under review right now. The Public Works Committee is looking at alternatives, other ways to fund local streets. There's been very clear direction to me to avoid using non-remonstrance agreements while this is under review, which makes sense, right? Why issue 20 of these non-remonstrance agreements, knowing that they're under review and it may change soon, right, within the next 6 months or a year. So we are trying to avoid them. And I think that, Pat did a really nice job in applying not the hardest regulation of the code, which is a 3/4 road improvement for any development on that street. That's the standard. But there's another standard that says if your driveway is going to be part of this unimproved roadway, then it's got to be paved, it's got to be hard surface, minimum 14 feet, but then the code says, or whatever the fire department says, typically 20 feet, no less than 20 feet. That's where the 20 feet comes from. That's from fire code, so we can make sure a fire truck can get down there safely, not on gravel, not through the water, right? So there's an aspect to that as well. So I think the criteria has been applied correctly here. I get where the applicant's coming from, the frustration. If there is a stormwater concern with putting the road into the standard here, that may qualify for a type C variance, a class C variance, right? That may qualify. There's other things that might qualify that we're kind of talking about that would be problematic. But for tonight, again, the question really is the criteria that's required for this partition appropriate? And if so, then you deny this. We work with the applicant on seeing if, there's other conditions that apply here, the other conditions in the design standards, and working with Public Works and the city engineer, which is more than what Pat and I do. Talking to the city engineer, what that's going to have to look like for the plans for that driveway on that unimproved street, and we'll go forward from there. We want the applicant to be able to get the house in there as bad as anybody does. So I did do quick math, and the manufactured home that was noted on there is more than what would be allowed as an accessory dwelling unit, which is no more than 900 square feet. And so that's why, again, Pat said, well, if you're going to put that manufactured home on the slot, you're going to have to divide it. And that's the path that we've gone through to get to where we're at. So again, I don't want to oversimplify things, but I do think there's some unanswered questions here, but it's not a lack of, staff interpreting this correctly. I think that we've tried to find a good alternative that isn't the 3/4 road improvement. There's a lesser alternative if we do the non-remonstrance agreement, which we're trying to avoid having to do, but in this case, we'll get hard surface in place, we'll do the non-remonstrance, which kicks it down the road far enough in advance that we'll have a little bit better guidance from the council which direction those are going to go. Meanwhile, we're able to put a driveway in, put a house in, and have access there. So I do think we've tried to find a good solution here.
And then just also to add in, because I know that it was mentioned by testimony, but the portion of the code that's referring to transportation improvements about non-remonstrative agreements, the language that's used in there says that the city may accept a future improvement guarantee if one of the more conditions is met, may being permissive. And so again, it's taking a step back, what are the conditions of approval you're looking at? It's did the building official not properly apply the conditions of approval? So if you have a permissive condition of approval, technically speaking, if it's permissive, it can go either way, versus the mandatory conditions of approval. If they didn't apply a mandatory condition of approval, that would be a grounds for approving an appeal. So that's, again, kind of where we're at. It's with the code, language and the design standards. And, it is something that, based on direction from council, how are they going to interpret a permissive criteria? That's just how it went this time, based on what the direction from council is. And so and I'm just hearing some of that. That's where looking at what are these standards, it's a lot of them are interconnected. A lot of them, there are mandatory and there are discretionary, so the mays. And that's kind of where it comes down to, looking at the staff report, what particular criteria was the building official looking at when they added this condition of approval. And if that condition of approval is necessary in order to properly apply these criteria, then you should deny the appeal. If you, looking at the code language, think that the conditional approval was not necessary to apply the criteria, then you should approve the appeal. And I got mixed up. If you find that the criteria was properly met, that the condition of approval was necessary to do that, then the appeal should be denied. You should say no, that the criteria were properly followed. But that's where it comes down to, looking at the specifics of the code and saying what's mandatory, what's permissive. And so as long as you find something in the code that you can point to that says this here is why we are approving this appeal, then you can do that. But that's the part that, might be the hard part, because you have hundreds of pages of code and you have to make sure that your decision is based off of what's in the code.
I'd like to let Commissioner Hunsaker go first. He's had his hand up quite a while, if that's all right.
It's flashing back and forth up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to get your attention.
Yep.
I already made my statement. I'll ask a couple of questions and then reply to those. My first statement, again, is that in order to petition that property, it had to front on a street. And that street is Lincoln Street. Chris, Pat, am I right or wrong?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, that's correct.
It's an unimproved street, yes.
Yes, it's an unimproved street. And we have a lot of unimproved streets that people live on and drive right onto the unimproved street. You are misinterpreting what that thing said. You're saying it is being used as a driveway. No, it's a street. Their driveway will come off of their property onto that street. That's, you don't make a street out of a street or a driveway out of a street to get to a street that's paved. That's our problem. It's not their problem. You're interpreting it so weird to say this street is being used as a driveway to get to that street, which is 12th. That doesn't make even any sense. I would think that you guys would be big enough to just say, yeah, we made a mistake. Okay. I am going to make a motion that the staff incorrectly determined that the access to the petition property would be 12th Street. In order to partition the property, the new property fronts on Lincoln Street. Therefore, the appeal is approved on condition approval number 7.
Do I have a second for that motion? And I'll state for educational purposes that when you second a motion, it doesn't mean that you're going to vote yes for it. It allows us to discuss that motion in particular and its details separate from the bigger case. So do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second it so we can discuss it.
Thank you. I agree with that. So
I just, the motion as it was presented, this portion of the development code that we have to follow clearly indicates that it has to be to an improved street.
Right.
And since I can't find the definition in at least the planning code of what an improved street is, I have to assume that it's what we understand to be an improved street and what Chris indicated.
It means paved. And it's in the code.
It is in the code? It is in the definitions?
It's in a portion of a definition and it means parens paved.
Right. So based on that, I think I would argue that I don't believe that particular motion can be carried.
And I'll counter that point, partly as devil's advocate, because I'm not entirely convinced yet. In that it says existing alleys or unimproved street right-of-ways used as driveways or new structures shall be paved to city standards from the improved public street from which vehicular access is taken. So the question I have is, can it be defined as being used as a driveway when there's already 2 other properties using the road? So in my mind, the language as written could have been intended, now we're playing Supreme Court, could have been intended to mean when you're building a new house and that house needs to get to an improved street over some ground that somebody else isn't already using as a street. And the fact that there are two properties using it as a street mean that it's not a driveway. It's not, this new property wouldn't be using it as a driveway. They'd be using it as a street, just like other people are using it as a street. If somebody were to be, an improved, if it does mean paved, it's been 20 years ago, but I'm very familiar with a couple of properties that were built on long gravel roads that were being used as streets, and they didn't have to pave it from their house to the nearest paved street. And just also thinking about the justice of it, and the applicability, and it's only 3, but what if it was 30, and all those sort of issues. So I struggle with kind of being in the middle between the points that have just here recently been made, and I'm curious to hear anybody else's input.
I'm going to rebuttal to you is that I agree with you. Because, I'm looking for a solution to allow the property owner to move forward. And I think there's another option to the motion that's on the floor. But we have to bring that one to closure before we can address another one.
Could
It was put on the
that
floor.
motion be read again, please?
If you wanted to suggest an amendment, that would be work too.
Yeah.
Well,
There's a request to restate the motion.
Yeah, could you restate the motion, Van?
I move that the staff incorrectly determined that the access to the petitioned property would be 12th Street. In order to petition the property itself, which, as you all remember, that's what the whole purpose was in the first place.
Well, now you're not stating the motion anymore.
Oh, I know. Okay, yes, all right. Okay, I move that the staff incorrectly determined that the access to the petition property would be 12th Street. In order to petition the property, the new property would front, or has to front, on Lincoln Street. Therefore, the appeal is approved on condition of approval number 7.
So I'll just jump in there and say that I'm leaning towards voting no on Van's motion, but I would probably be leaning towards voting to approve the appeal based on the use of the road as an unimproved road by additional properties, and therefore not meeting the definition of it, since it does not have a single user as opposed to multiple users. And maybe I'm very wrong about that, but that's kind of where I'm leaning at the moment.
For what it's worth, I don't think you're wrong, and I would support the motion if it were amended that way.
Hold on one second. I think we got Commissioner
just-
Jessen after the city attorney.
Just for my edification, so that when we draft findings, what portion of the code are you specifically referencing with respect to that specific condition being improperly applied? I'm just trying to, I'm just trying to make sure.
Possibly no sections of the code, but the section of the code here that's I guess it's under the Public Works Design Standards at the top of page 5.
Okay.
It discusses that an existing unimproved street right-of-ways used as driveways for new structures. Because the existing Lincoln Street right-of-way is used for much more than a driveway for this proposed new structure, that it does not meet that criteria.
Yeah.
A little tenuous, but that's what I'm thinking.
So again, my
Mr.
previous point that I think a lot of this hangs on the definition of driveway. And I think at this point, historically, the city has interpreted that as meaning the path that your car will travel from the most improved, the closest improved street all the way to your garage. That is the definition of driveway that traditionally the city has been using. And I think that is that is an acceptable interpretation of the code. And I don't mean to disagree that perhaps the intent of the code when it was written was something else, but we also have a current standard that the city is trying to uphold for every improvement, every new development. And this case, this appeal just happens to be the first appeal where the city is wanting to require an upgrade to a currently unimproved road that other residents are currently using. So this happens to be the first case, but I think we also need to consider historically, in recent history, how has the city been applying this code? And are we as the commission going to go against that most recent interpretation and application of the code, meaning driveway and improvements?
I'll rebut that with a very recent example. North 18th Street, until I'm not sure it's paved to city standards now, and until very recently, I know it wasn't paved. There's been some improvement to that pavement here in the last year to year and a half, but immediately prior to that, there were some new houses constructed at the north end of North 18th Street that were not required to improve North 18th to city standards.
No, but they're required to have hard surface from their driveway all the way to the improved portion of 18th Street.
Well,
to the paved portion of it.
If improved means paved to city standards, then I don't think North 18th meets that yet.
Well, so the city has a standard for a asphalt full width city street. We also have a standard for chip sealed streets, which 18th Street is a chip sealed street to the city standard.
Okay.
So when you say city standard, there's different standards for different levels of streets.
Okay.
A fully improved street is going to be curb, gutter, sidewalks, et cetera. But we do have a standard that allows for a chip sealed street, which was applied to 18th Street and 11th Street and others.
So the obvious question is, why can't that be applied here?
It can be. It's much more onerous to require a property owner that's putting one house on their lot to require them to do a 3/4 road improvement to the full city improvement, which is curb, gutter,
No, I'm talking
sidewalk.
about the chip. I'm talking about the chip. I'm talking about just a 20-foot wide chip seal street. Why can't we apply that here since it's been applied on 18th Street?
Because, well, the improvement that's done there, the standard is that it can't be something that just gets torn out when the full street comes into place. So,
and that's what's going to occur here, because there's no way that the city engineers are going to be able to fully engineer all of the curbs and gutters and street surfaces of 12th, which is what they're going to have to do, the entire 12th, and Lincoln, to determine where the finished grade of that roadway is going to be in order to solve the drainage problems that are there. And that's where I keep coming back to. So yeah, on 18th Street, there's a roadway there that you know is going to get torn up. Well, we have that same condition here because there's no way we're going to put in, and we've already talked about in the petitioner's testimony, it indicated her understanding that she would have to pay for the roadway twice, meaning she would have to put it down a paved roadway, meeting the top coat and the base, whatever it is, 5/12 or whatever that roadway grade design section is per the city standards, which is a huge amount of work compared to a gravel and chip road surface that thereby meets the intent, and I would argue the letter of the codes that we're talking about. It's an option. So we have an option of telling her to put a paved road in there and denying this appeal. We have an option, and this is the way I'm looking at it right now, we have an option of doing the chip roadway, and I still think there's still the option of the I cannot pronounce the word, because we're using it partially. So it's not like, well, if we weren't using that particular tool at all, that's why I say there's another option out there. If we weren't using that particular tool at all for part of the requirements we're putting on the owner, why can't we do it for all the requirements? And now we also have another option of using a far more reasonable, because the chip is going to become partial, but depending on where the finished grade is, that could be part of it really doesn't get torn up. It may become part of the new road base when it gets added to and put on top. Because my guess is, and this is my engineering guess, from my experience is that roadway is going to have to be elevated from where it is today.
Pat, did you have any conversations with Kevin or the engineer about chip seal versus asphalt, road width, makeup, anything, just hard surface?
Yeah, I was just more getting into the code that applied here, because I wanted to see it in writing and my interpretation of it. But isn't 12th Street is, the thing that I found out that was interesting was 12th Street's not in the city's inventory. Is that correct? It's a private local.
The road district, yeah.
The road district, but it's maintained through covenants or something by the homeowners?
Separate taxing district.
Separate taxing district. So can't that money be used to chip seal or pave this road?
It's a question for the road district, if they'd be willing to pay for this to go in.
Oh, we got the president right here?
Well, I'm not gonna put him on the spot. I think you're getting away from at the land use level, we're not looking at a lot of those details. We're looking at, does the code require us to, when we're partitioning a lot, does the code require us to look at access and how you're going to get access? And does the code require that access be paved? And the answer to those questions is yes. Whether it's 4 feet of or 4 inches of asphalt, or it's 2 inches of chip seal, I'm not seeing anything in there other than, again, there's other design standard that says, whenever you're building it, it should have to be torn out. We get to the point to talk to Public Works, the engineer may be okay with rock and chip seal on top of it, knowing that it's going to have to be torn out, but that's a cheaper option than having to put the asphalt down. We don't get that level of discussion when we're at the planning level on doing a partition.
But we need the definitions of what we're dealing with here.
Well, however, I think what's before the Planning Commission today is whether the applicant in the future is going to need to have a paved surface from the end of their property to the paved road. So paved surface or not, regardless of criteria, and that once there is a building permit and a decision regarding engineering standards, that's when they could make an appeal based on regarding the criteria that's being held to them. So it's really a two-step process, I think.
And again, talking about the options, if the option that is in this paper was an option that it was possible under the code being properly implemented and interpreted, this appeal needs to be denied. And so that's what you're looking at here. So if it was an option that what is presented here, applying the code, regardless of what better or worse options were available, even if this was the worst option, again, if it was properly applying the code, the appeal has to be denied. And so that's why you're here tonight, was the code properly applied in a way that this outcome that's on this paper is, what is reasonably, what is a proper outcome applying the code.
Regarding a paved surface, regardless of standard.
Got people online desperately trying to.
Who was first?
And of course.
All right. Commissioner Hunsaker, please.
You guys got talking about driveways. The definition for driveway means areas that provide vehicular access to a site, except for public and private streets. A driveway begins at the property line and extends into the site. Driveways do not include parking, maneuvering, or circulation areas in parking spaces. So this is another place where it specifically says a street isn't a driveway.
Can I pause you right there and ask which section of the code that's in?
Yeah. It's on page 18-7, 18.15010 definitions.
And then may I also ask where this language at the top of page 5 comes from that says it's public work design standards?
So that's going to be in, if you look at the bottom of page 3,
Yes.
where it talks about PMC chapter 18.60. If you go and look at what 18.60 says, that's where it has what the design standards are, and there's a list of a few of them that need to be considered, and I can read those out for you if that's helpful.
I guess to get to the heart of my question, which of those, if there's a contradiction between those two, does one take precedence over the other?
No, that's my understanding.
Thank you.
Doesn't 1860, that's more land use design standards, but it references the public work standards, because that's a whole different book, and it's a whole different, it's not in the PMCs.
Okay.
It's design standard for land use, 1860.
Right, but I think it was my understanding public works design standards are referred in those 1860 design standard things, so like 1865, 1870.
Yeah, exactly, and that's
Right,
why, and I don't really have that book, so I went to Kevin as a source, and he gave me Division 2 in 2.30.J, this definition, this requirement. So
and Division 2 is also referred to within the municipal code.
I would just say, as a cautionary thing, be careful on setting precedent, because public hearing, anything that, if you guys approve something through an interpretation, unless you want an official interpretation, you're setting precedent for everything going forward. All you have to do is point back to this case. So,
Which is why I'm making the point about when this is in writing, when we do our findings, we're pointing to a specific thing, and so that's.
yeah, well, you can't interpret it in your own without coming up with a proper definition and pointing to something. It can't just be, I feel it sounds like it could be this. That could have something bad.
Mr. Justin has his hand up.
And I'll just pause for a second, because I think a very important part of our role here is education of the public. And something that's often very hard to understand is that our job is to interpret everything that's written here. And even if we hate what's written here, that's our only job. And so it's not about what we want. So whatever that is worth. Thank you for your understanding.
I will certainly, excuse me for interrupting, but I would certainly go back to Public Works and say, is there options? Is there other options that would work for this situation?
Yeah.
Especially since we have it attaching to a road that is unimproved. Well, not, I mean, it's semi-improved, but it's only improved up to a certain level. And maybe taking what we're requiring them to do to a higher level than what's already existing, when it should be either equal or maybe because of the functionality less. So we can go, we can continue the conversation.
Yeah.
I just don't want to.
Well, and again, back to what was said earlier, I think that is not part of what's under discussion here.
Exactly.
That's an appeal to a standard that might get applied when applying for a building permit.
Some of the sentiment that's going on here, because I think everybody wants to help, and feels like there's certain things that we can do and we can't do.
And do the right thing for the city. So I'll remind us that I paused Van. So were you in the middle of something and you have more, Van?
Well, the things I've mostly talked about have been ignored, particularly by staff.
No, Van.
They did agree that the street, that Lincoln Street is a street, and that it was partitioned on that street. that's the only thing that we have to determine is, are we requiring them to access with a paved driveway to that street and nothing else? This thing about having a paved access on a road to 12th Street is erroneous.
Well,
There's nothing there is absolutely nothing that you can show me in these statutes that says that's what you have to do.
well, I'll rebut that after Commissioner Jessen has a chance to talk.
I just want to point out to the commission that we have been reviewing this one application for 2 hours now. It's past 8 o'clock and we still have one more appeal to go over. If this appeal does require a deeper dive of code, I might suggest the commission consider a continuance on a later date, maybe considering another session before the next scheduled session to review this together. But probably don't want to have a recurrence of what happened last session and going over 3 hours. Just want to make us all cognizant of the time. I know we all want to get it right on this one, but it may take more time than we have tonight.
I think we're close to conclusion, but I'm usually wrong about that. Let me say one thing about what Van said first, very briefly. I think, Van, the top of page 5 is what's in question that contradicts what you said. And to me, that's the crux of our decision tonight, is to understand how that applies, because it very specifically says that the new structure has to pave a public street if it's being used as a driveway. And
you did say that. And we already have agreed that through a remonstrance agreement, you could do that at a later date.
Correct. Commissioner Rose.
Well, it's a process question. If we deny this, then what happens after that? What are the other options after it's denied?
I think it can be appealed to city council, correct? Yeah, it can be appealed to city council.
Okay.
Or it could be accepted, and then when the building permit is applied for, and there were specific standards provided for that paving, that could be appealed as well.
Or it could be a variance can be applied for, Class C variance being that the specific and unique characteristics of this land make it a hardship to comply with certain criteria, conditions of approval. Okay. And so that's another process that is on a later date.
Okay.
But
that's not part of our process.
No, not tonight at all. No.
But I wouldn't hang my hat on that, because there's a lot of specific language in there about site constraints and restrictions as opposed to cost. If it just costs a lot of money to pave the road, that's not a reason to approve the variance.
Can we call the question on the first motion?
We absolutely can. So there's a motion on the table to, I'm going to get the words backwards.
Do you want me to read it again?
Please.
I move that staff incorrectly determined that the access to the petition property would be 12th Street. In order to petition the property, the new property fronts on Lincoln Street. Therefore, the appeal is approved on condition of approval number 7.
Thank you.
We've already got a second on that motion, correct?
Yeah, we did. We've been deliberating, and now it's my job to ask people how to vote, how they're voting. So all in favor of the motion to approve the appeal, am I saying that right?
Correct.
If you're in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
I'm going to say nay, but that's fine. I'm on procedural, so
Yeah. Yep,
I'm good.
no, that's the way it works. So the appeal is approved.
And that's on the basis that,
If you ask
Yeah.
all the voters, you'd probably get different reasons every time.
so what I'm going to recommend is that before we have the decision that it is, we write up the findings. Does that make sense?
It's included in the motion, is because the street referenced is Lincoln Street and not 12th Street. So it's based on the interpretation of which street is the fronting street.
Okay,
So-
as long as everyone feels comfortable.
I'm going to capture the finding.
Well,
And
frankly, I'd like the finding to specifically state that this vote was not made on the basis of sentiment, but a considered interpretation of the code that was put in front of us.
Yeah,
I think it's special pleading, and I resent it a little bit to come in and say that after 2 hours, what I think was very good deliberation, to suggest at the last minute that we're trying to do something because it'll make us feel good. And so I would like the findings to reflect that it was done after considered deliberation of the code and an appropriate interpretation of the code. And maybe a year from now I'll be better educated and I won't feel that way. But I think people did a deliberative job here.
Yeah.
And I want to change my vote to go on record that's unanimous. So there's no question.
Is that allowed? Changes.
So we got a couple things going. We should probably have a motion for a finding if you'd like to make that finding. If you want to make the motion, and we'll take a second on that if anybody's interested, and then we can talk about the vote. But if you want that stated in the record, then it needs to be a motion. And
Yeah,
approved.
please do.
My motion is that I move that the findings include a specific finding that the decision of the planning commission was based on due deliberation and its interpretation of the code.
Do you want to specifically reference that one section, or do you want it to be general?
That's fine with me.
Public Work Design Standards, Division 2, 2.30.
2.30 point J. Yeah.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I guess that was unanimous. Thank you.
I'm sorry, my head was down during the vote.
It's unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other findings that anybody would like to add outside of what was stated in the motion and the one just passed?
I mean, we could get real specific, but I think everybody's got a specific point, so leaving a little bit general is probably safer and quicker.
Nobody's going to be able to figure out that motion. I think we're legally safe.
I didn't say that, and that is not what I intended either.
Still good. We can't get sued on that because no one's going to understand it.
That's how precedent's made.
That's it. We're in the clear.
Okay.
And regarding the vote, I'll go to legal on that, but I think if you just state your sentiment, that'll be captured in the minutes and that'll suffice unless we want to.
I will base my prior vote based on John Barlow's additional findings. That, based on that, I will change my prior vote to positive.
So I think it still needs to be the original motion being the motion against, because it'll be captured as you.
I approve the original.
With the finding.
With the original finding. I approve vote positive based on the original findings.
I'm just not sure that we can change the.
If not, leave it the way it was, and that's
You want
fine.
to
I'll be there
suspend the rules, so you
for
can-
perpetuity. That's fine.
I think what you've just said is going to show up in the minutes, so
Okay.
that'll probably be what you need to point to if you're running for governor someday.
I don't think that'll ever be
Defend
the case.
defend your vote. All right, well, I think we need at least a 5-minute recess.
We also.
Oh, yes, you're right. Let's close the public. Let's go ahead, I'm sorry.
I can read it.
Thank you.
Any applicant not satisfied with this decision may appeal to the city council within 12 days of the date of the notice of decision is signed.
Okay, thank you.
So you understand your appeal is approved? Yeah, okay.
One more very minor point. So when it comes to applying for a building permit, does that mean that it's a slam dunk, that there's no improvement needed on any street? Or is that still a little bit of a gray area? And
So now you have discussion with Public Works and the city engineer on what the requirements are for building permit.
so it was a positive result for you, but you're not done
Still
yet.
an uphill battle.
Yeah.
We'll talk.
It should be.
Yeah. We'll find a way.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Let's take a 2-minute recess, 5-minute recess.
Okay.
Okay, City of Philomath Planning Commission resumes after a recess. Our next order of business is PC 23-03, 225 North 8th Street. And the applicant is requesting a change in setbacks for historical reasons. We're going to have the same order of proceeding with the staff report, applicant presentation, public testimony in favor, and then in opposition, and lastly with neutral, planning commission questions of staff, rebuttals, deliberations, and a final decision. There have not been any requests for any testimony other than the applicant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Didn't you want to find out if anybody been by the property or anything first?
We'll get there. We'll get there. So I don't think we need to put a limit on the testimony time limit. I don't think we need a time limit, but please keep your comments relevant to the criteria on which the decision needs to be made. Persons testifying either orally or in writing may request a continuance to address additional documents or evidence submitted in favor of the application. If this request is made, please identify the new document or evidence during your testimony. Persons testifying may also request that the record remain open 7 additional days to submit additional written evidence. Request for allowing the record to remain open shall be included in your testimony. And the public hearing is now open. Do any planning commission members wish to declare any conflicts of interest? Do any wish to declare any ex parte contacts or site visits?
Site visits?
Okay. Site visits? Okay. So we had...
We need to capture those, sorry.
Yeah.
A little more carefully.
Yeah, Commissioner Malat, Commissioner Rose, and Commissioner Barlow, as well as Councilor Causey. Does anyone wish to rebut those disclosures? Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds, meaning the Planning Commission is not the appropriate body for this hearing? Land use decisions, such as the case under consideration this evening, are evaluated against applicable criteria from the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan as presented in the staff report. And we will now hear the staff report from Mr. Deppa.
So, as you recall, we get these Class C variances. They got really high standards to meet as far as the criteria goes. And as some of them being applied to this proposal have conclusions that agree towards the proposed variance, or the requested variance, I should say. There are others that don't. And there's, so in part of the process, or the way to get to an approval, is that it meets all of the requirements. So we wrote out findings and a conclusion for each. And typically you're looking for something physical, something geographical in the property that cause you maybe to kind of lean this way. That, you know, precluded from being built on any other part of the site, or make it more difficult. And in this case, the city has looked at it as there are other options for this location. So with that, being more, the conclusion for the hardship of being self-imposed and being put here intentionally instead of another place that's meets the requirements of the code. Kind of set me off to recommend that the variance be denied, and then the findings be recognized as the approval criteria.
Okay.
And I didn't write you a motion this time because, again, on Class C, I didn't want to kind of skew the discussion in that. So I just left it up and gave you findings and conclusions on this one.
Okay, thank you. Are there any preliminary questions of staff at this time from the Planning Commission members? I have a question. Is there anything in our code or precedents, I suppose, for historic considerations if SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office, had an opinion about something or a request? Could that be relevant to our decision criteria based on either our city code or maybe more relevant state code regarding land use decisions?
There's nothing in the code that would direct you to look at that as criteria or an alternative or mandating it. But more importantly, this is not a historic structure. This is a brand new garage. It's not like three walls are still up and it's about to be condemned and we're asking to keep it there and rebuild it in its original form. That building's been long gone and now we're just building a new building. So there's no historic value to it.